The rescue. The prairie wind carried the scent of wild sage and dust as the sun slipped low, setting fire to the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Luke Carver sat tall in the saddle of his bay gelding, shoulders broad beneath a weathered coat, eyes scanning the fading light. 4 or 5 years now, he had ridden his land alone, a widower with only cattle, silence, and the ghosts of memory for company. He hadn't spoken Clara's name aloud in years, but her absence lived in every room of the ranch house, in every empty chair, in the stillness of nights when he could not sleep. Townsfolk said Luke had turned into stone after her death, silent, cold, unmovable. Perhaps they were right. He had nothing left to give, and so he had given up speaking at all, except when work demanded it. But fate has a way of finding even those who hide. As Luke rode the fence line near the cottonwoods by the creek, his horse snorted and stamped. Luke reined him in, frowning, listening. Over the whisper of grass, he caught it, the faintest sound. A child's cry. He slid from the saddle, boots sinking into the soft ground. Rifle in hand, he moved toward the sound with caution born of years on the frontier. Then he saw them. A woman lay crumpled in the grass, her dress torn and bloodied at the sleeve. Beside her, 2 children, 1 boy, no more than 8, and a girl, perhaps 5, huddled together, wide-eyed and pale. The boy clutched a stick in trembling hands, holding it like a weapon, standing in front of his sister with a bravery too big for his small frame. "Stay back!" the boy cried, his voice shaking but defiant. Luke lowered the rifle, his rough face softening. "Easy now," he said, voice low and steady from disuse. "I ain't here to hurt you." The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering. She struggled to lift her head, eyes glassy with fever and pain. When she saw Luke, she seemed to fight for words, her lips barely moving. "Please," she whispered. "Help us." Luke crouched beside her, his hands gentle as he checked the wound on her arm. It wasn't fresh, days old, festering, rimmed red. She wouldn't last without care. "You'll be all right," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He looked at the children. "I'll take you back to my place. She needs tending." The boy's chin quivered. "Where's your place?" "Not far. Safer than here." The girl clutched her brother's arm, eyes brimming with tears. He swallowed hard, then nodded. "We'll come." Luke lifted the woman carefully, cradling her against his chest. She was light, far too light, as though hunger had stripped her down to bone and willpower. He mounted, settling her before him in the saddle, while the children walked alongside, never letting go of each other's hands. By the time they reached the ranch house, the sun had vanished. The log cabin stood strong against the twilight, lantern light glowing faintly from the window. Luke carried the woman inside and laid her on the bed that had once been Clara's. His chest tightened, but he forced the ache aside. This woman needed more than his grief. He boiled water, cleaned the wound, and wrapped her arm with strips of clean cloth. The children hovered in the doorway, watching his every move with suspicion and desperate hope. "What's your names?" Luke asked quietly as he worked. The boy straightened. "I'm Samuel. This is my sister, Ruth. And she's our mama." Luke looked at the pale woman on the bed. Her lashes fluttered, and she forced her eyes open again. "Mary," she whispered, voice hoarse. "My name is Mary." Luke gave a small nod. "Mary, you'll be safe here." Tears welled in her eyes. Her lips trembled as she leaned closer, her breath barely a sound. "Don't," she whispered, fear lacing her words. "Don't let him take us back." Luke frowned, his gut tightening. "Who?" Her eyes brimmed with terror. "My fiancé. Please, don't let him." Her strength failed. She sank back against the pillow, slipping into unconsciousness. The fire crackled in the hearth. Samuel and Ruth clung to each other in the doorway, staring at Luke as though he were their last hope. Luke stood there, a man who had sworn he had nothing left to give. Yet as he looked at them, the wounded mother, the trembling children, he felt the stone around his heart begin to crack. He didn't know what storm was coming, but he knew one thing. Whoever that man was, he would not have them. Not while Luke Carver still drew breath. Shadows of the past. The first days at the Carver Ranch passed in a quiet rhythm, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire and the soft voices of children. Mary drifted in and out of fever, and each time she woke, Luke was there, silent, steady, a shadow beside the bed. He brought her water, spooned her broth, and changed her bandages with a rough tenderness that surprised even him. Samuel, protective and wary, followed Luke's every move. At first, he bristled like a watchdog, standing between Ruth and any hand that came near. But Luke never raised his voice, never forced, never frightened. He gave the boy chores, carrying kindling, helping in the barn, fetching water from the pump. Samuel accepted them stiffly at first, but soon his small chest swelled with pride at each completed task. Ruth was gentler. She clung to her mother's side, whispering prayers in the dark, but sometimes she would wander to Luke's chair by the fire and curl into sleep with her thumb tucked against her lip. The first time it happened, Luke froze, staring down at the small body against his leg. It had been years since a child's presence filled the house. He let out a shaky breath and, with rough hands that trembled, pulled a quilt around her shoulders. The silence that had once been his only companion now carried new sounds: Ruth's giggles when Samuel tripped over his boots, Mary's soft groans as she healed, the creak of bed springs when children climbed where they shouldn't. The ranch no longer felt like a graveyard. But Mary's eyes, when she was strong enough to speak, carried shadows. One night, after the children had gone to bed in the loft, Mary sat by the fire, her arm wrapped in clean linen. Luke poured her tea and placed it in her hands. She looked at him with a fragile gratitude, then lowered her gaze. "You should know," she said, voice low, "why we ran." Luke's jaw tightened. He waited. "His name is Thomas Hale. A wealthy man, respected in town, charming enough to win favor wherever he goes. My father arranged the engagement after my husband passed, said it was security for me and the children." "But security—" She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Security turned to fear. He has a temper, Luke. I saw it before the wedding date even came. He struck Samuel once for speaking out of turn. He told me Ruth needed to be taught obedience. He wanted to own us, not love us." Luke's hands clenched on his knees. The firelight threw sharp lines across his face. "So you ran," he said quietly. "I had to." Her eyes lifted, shining with anguish. "But Thomas is not the sort of man who lets go of what he claims. He'll come looking. He has men, money, friends-in-law and church. If he finds us—" She broke off, shuddering. "Promise me, Luke. Promise me you won't let him take my children." Luke's throat tightened. He remembered Clara's final breath, how he had promised her she'd never be alone. He had failed that promise. But here was another chance, one he hadn't asked for, yet one he could not turn away from. "You're safe here," he said, the words like iron. For the first time, Mary's shoulders eased. The storm arrives. Days stretched into weeks. Mary regained strength, Samuel laughed more easily, and Ruth followed Luke like a shadow, handing him nails or rope as he worked. The house that had once been filled only with silence now breathed with life again. But shadows gathered. One evening, as Luke mended a fence at the far pasture, he saw dust rising on the horizon, riders, 4 of them, cutting across the prairie. His gut turned heavy. He finished the repair, mounted his horse, and rode hard back to the cabin. Mary was at the door when he arrived, face pale, eyes wide. "It's him," she whispered, clutching Ruth to her skirts while Samuel stood stiff, jaw set in fear. Luke swung down, handed Samuel his rifle. "Take your sister inside. Bar the door." Samuel's eyes widened, but he nodded, clutching the weapon like it was a sword of destiny. Mary grabbed Luke's arm. Don't fight him. You can't win against his power. If something happens to you. Luke placed a hand over hers, steady as the earth. He won't touch you. The riders came fast, hooves pounding the dirt until they reined up in front of the cabin. At their head sat Thomas Hale himself, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, dressed finer than any rancher had a right to be. His eyes glittered cold, like polished steel. "Well," Hale drawled, scanning the cabin. "A widow and her brats, hiding in the arms of a broken cowboy. How quaint." His gaze cut to Luke. "Step aside, Carver. They're mine." Luke's voice came low, a growl beneath the steady prairie wind. "They don't belong to you." Hale's smile tightened. "The law says otherwise. Papers signed. Promises made. She is bound to me." "She belongs only to herself," Luke answered. "And these children will never know your hand again." The men shifted in their saddles, hands on gun belts. Tension hung thick as the dusk sky deepened to purple. Mary stood at the doorway, trembling, but her eyes shone with desperate trust fixed on Luke's back. Samuel, unseen behind the curtain, aimed the rifle through a crack, teeth clenched. Hale's smile broke. "Then you die with them." His hand went for his pistol. But Luke was faster. Years of ranch work and sorrow had made him steady, and grief had sharpened him into steel. His gun cleared leather in a heartbeat, the crack of the shot tearing the evening air. Hale's hat flew from his head, the bullet carving inches from his skull. The other men froze, eyes wide, hands suspended. Luke's stance was unyielding, his rifle steady, his face hard as stone. "Next one finds your heart," he said coldly. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Hale spat into the dust, hatred burning in his glare. "This ain't over, Carver. You'll regret crossing me." "Maybe," Luke said. "But you won't touch them." With a jerk of his reins, Hale wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following, dust rising behind them. A new dawn. When silence returned, Mary collapsed against the doorframe, tears spilling freely. Samuel lowered the rifle with shaking hands. Ruth pressed against her side. Luke holstered his gun and turned, his eyes meeting Mary's. Something passed between them, fear, relief, and the fragile beginnings of trust. "You're safe," he said simply. She stepped closer, voice breaking. "No, Luke. We're safe because of you." For the first time in years, Luke felt the weight of loneliness lift. Clara's memory would never fade, but perhaps life had given him another purpose, another family to guard. That night, as the children slept in peace and Mary rested without fear, Luke sat by the fire, lantern light flickering across his weathered face. His cabin was no longer silent. The walls no longer echoed with emptiness. For he had found, in the ruins of his grief, something worth living for again. And as the prairie wind sang through the night, Luke Carver swore to himself he would never let them go.